Look at it. It's just there. Oh, go on, you got it. Cool.
Oh my god.
There's two. I didn't know there were two supporting things.
Welcome back to our channel, Coral Jacks, where we visit ancient sites and explore the history and folklore that surround them. In this video, we're up in the north of Wales at a cromlech called Ty Newydd, in the parish of Llanfaelog on the Isle of Anglesey. As you can see, some attempts have been made to shore up the capstone and keep it on top of the surviving uprights, but it's left looking a little strange unless you're very selective with the angle of your photograph. Now, this monument is by no means the largest or most impressive in the area, and there are other much finer examples and better preserved or better reconstructed, but it is a great example of how these sites have been treated over the past few hundred years, and we've managed to find a variety of descriptions going back as far as 1781. The site was once described as a double cromlech, and appears like it might have had a much larger capstone, similar in appearance to some of the large menhir type capstones that have been used in Brittany. In this video, we're going to cover the documented history of this site, which tells us how the capstone and the rest of the monument have ended up in such a degraded state.
But yeah, how bizarre. Like, we've seen them with the support in before, but actually concrete in the floor is a bit odd. I now see the criticism. What do you reckon, Zeb? A bit weird, isn't it? That's like the third set go past since we've been here. Yeah.
The earliest drawing we could find of Ty Newydd cromlech is from Thomas Pennant's A Tour Through Wales, in which he chronicles the 3 journeys he made through Wales between 1773 and 1776. His mention of the site is brief, and the picture only seems to appear in a special edition of the books that he had printed for his own personal library. But luckily for us, you can now view all of these special editions free online through the National Library of Wales or on Wikimedia Commons. In 1899, Welsh scholar Edward Owen wrote to J. Lloyd Griffith, treasurer of the Cambrian Archaeological Association, noting the recent cataloguing of British Museum Additional Manuscript number 33636, a volume which he predicted would be of considerable interest to Anglesey antiquaries. This was one of a series of volumes in which the Reverend John Skinner described the tours which he undertook over many years in various parts of England and Wales, around the turn of the 19th century. Skinner was well acquainted with well-known antiquarian Richard Colthour and often toured with him, but it doesn't seem like he did in Wales. The writings on Anglesey were bequeathed to the British Museum in October 1839, on condition that they remained unopened for 50 years. The illustrations are described by Owen as very roughly coloured and poorly executed, but nevertheless he emphasised their importance, as denoting the former character of churches that have since been subjected to restoration, and of course showing us how some of the ancient Anglesey monuments looked back then. Skinner's narratives and illustrations are potentially even more important today, offering us sometimes the only glimpses of monuments now either vanished entirely or at least heavily altered. Skinner also provided an important account of Bryn Celli Ddu, containing our best available description of the near destruction around 1780 of the Western Cairn by wall builders, and the discovery in the mid-18th century of a chamber in the large Eastern Cairn. Skinner entered this chamber himself and describes its construction. But what does he actually say about this monument? The following is quoted from 10 days' tour through the Isle of Anglesey. Hence, continuing our walk to the northward, we passed through the parish of Llanfaelog, and about a half a mile beyond the church came to a very perfect cromlech. The capstone is rather of an oblong shape, and measured 16 feet long, 6 wide and 3 thick. It only rested upon 3 supporters, each about 3 feet high, although there were 4 placed in the ground. Near the cromlech were lying 2 large stones, the one 17 feet long and 3 feet thick.
Can you see it?
Just doing the classic
Oh, I can see it.
short passage, entirely covered with Mount Burton stones.
Look at it. Oh god. So yeah, the thing about Anglesey, this is constant.
The next record we have of Ty Newydd cromlech is from Longueville Jones, a Welsh archaeologist and artist. He describes a double cromlech and also provides us with 2 sketches of the monument, and in the second account describes his shock at how much the site had changed since his previous visit. The following is quoted from On the Cromlechs extant on the Isle of Anglesey. A remarkably fine remain of this nature is the cromlech at Llanfaelog, of which we append a representation. The cromlech still standing is composed of one flat on several upright stones. By its side lie the fallen remains of a much larger cromlech. Underneath the upright one are still to be seen numerous small stones, and the ground rises gently toward the upright supports on all sides. But on referring to Pennant, we find him saying, "Others again are quite bedded in the carneth or the heap of stones." If then this cromlech could have been so stripped of its covering since the end of the last century, what may we not expect to have taken place in other instances? And then we have a second account from Longueville Jones in Archaeologia Cambrensis. In 1844, I visited Anglesey and took a drawing of the double cromlech at Llanfaelog, one of the best in the island. One cromlech was erect, the other by its side thrown down, or rather, I should say, that the 2 constituted the remains of a large chambered mound, perhaps of a cromlech with a passage, as at Bryn Celli in the same island. The cap of the fallen one was broken in 2, but when entire it was not less than 15 feet long. Fortunately, this drawing remains in my portfolio, and it shows the importance of preserving memorials of these early monuments, whenever opportunity offers, made with all possible care, for since then the fallen cromlech has utterly disappeared, and the upright one has been so seriously damaged that its destruction will now be the work of only a few winters, all through the sheer stupidity of men. I had occasion to pass by this spot last summer, and on going to renew my acquaintance with the venerable monument, found nothing more remaining than what is represented in the accompanying engraving. An improving tenant had come upon the farm. He wanted to repair his walls, and though the native rock cropped out all around, he found it more convenient to blast the fallen stone, the very existence of which was probably unknown to either the landlord or his agent. Hence the fallen one disappeared. The tenant, however, seems to have been in some degree aware of the importance of the erect cromlech, for he cut a kind of trench all around it, and by subsequent ploughing has left it standing on a kind of low mound. Formerly it stood in a grass field among gorse bushes, with no wall near it, and only some broken embankments with Anglesey hedges on the top. A few years ago, the land came by inheritance, on the death of the lord, to the present possessor of Kinmel, and the tenant, desirous of showing respect to his new landlord, determined to celebrate the occasion with a bonfire. The fire he lighted on the top of the cromlech, and though the stone was 5 feet thick, the action of the fire in the air split the ponderous mass right through the middle, crossways. Of course, this injury was not intended, but it was well known and lamented in the neighbourhood. 10 men with 3 or 4 horses and some powerful levers would repair this cromlech in a single day and guarantee its preservation for ages. But will they do so?
So just in case they are cut marks, because it kind of looks like some little holes there.
And then in 1912 we have another account, and this time a photo. The capstone and one support are of Ordovician pebbly sandstone. The second support is granite and the third dolerite. The fourth upright has vanished. It's very difficult to find the orientation of this dolmen. Sir Norman Lockyer at first believed that it was to the sunrise at the winter solstice, but he thinks it quite possible that an alignment to the summer solstice may be the correct one. No other astronomical alignment, he says, than a solstice one is suggested by the arrangement of the stones. In August 1936, the site was excavated by Charles Phillips. Mr. Phillips noted that the monument had been under the protection of the Office of Works for some years, and the rapid increase in the size of the crack during the previous 2 years had made preservation work imperative. The capstone received temporary support while this work was done, and it was seen as a good chance to study the chamber and any possible contents. When the work began, the chamber was buried in a small mound to within a foot of the underside of the capstone, and although some of it was original cairn, the great part of the top consisted of material recently dumped there by the Office of Works to give further support to the monument. Before any of this top dressing was removed, the upper part of what looked like a large stone could be seen in the chamber area, and it was expected that this would prove to be one of the support stones missing from the south side. The expectation was fulfilled, and after the upper part of the filling had been removed, a large stone was found resting flat in the chamber, covering a good deal of it. This stone was a pebbly sandstone, and it had clearly reached its position, with base slewed round towards the end stone of the chamber, as a result of attempts to overturn the capstone. On the lower edge of the latter, close to the point where it must have rested on this stone, tool marks of comparatively recent date are plainly visible. After this fallen stone had been moved out of the chamber, the contents and floor were carefully examined. It was found that a practically uniform layer of fine black earth containing much charcoal was covering the whole floor, the extent of which will be seen on plan Figure 1. It seldom exceeded 2 inches in thickness, except in 1 or 2 minor instances where it was filling up slight depressions in the barren soil underneath. Scattered freely through this deposit were 3 beach pebbles and 110 pieces of broken white quartz of varying sizes, a familiar accessory to Bronze Age sepulture. No traces of human remains were found, either burnt or unburnt, and the only animal vestige was a very old and decayed limpet shell. 5 small flint flakes were found scattered in the deposit, 3 showing clear traces of fire, and there was also a small lump of flint from the beach. The only stone objects of importance were the remains of a fine barbed and tanged flint arrowhead, greatly damaged by fire, and a tiny chip from a polished flint axe with a dense white patina. 9 small fragments of pottery were also found in 2 groups, all from the same type of pot. The fragments are too small to give a decisive clue to their age and character, but they come from thin vessels of a fine light buff coloured, smoothly surfaced ware, with little or no backing, and now very friable. 1 piece belongs to a rim of the thin rounded form normally associated with beaker, and there is good reason to regard all the pottery as belonging to this class. 1 piece shows a trace of what may have been the impress of a fine cord. So far as they go, the finds can be referred with reasonable safety to the earliest part of the Bronze Age. A small surviving piece of the walling of the passage was found in situ, as well as a small relic of dry stone walling between stones A and B. At the entrance to the chamber, there was a small patch of earth fired to a bright red colour on the same level as the carbon-stained floor. The surviving trace of the passage consisted of a slab of dolerite and a roughly square section. This was 2 feet long and had broken into 2 nearly equal pieces in situ. The outermost end of the slab was comparatively freshly broken also. It is clear from the present arrangement of the stones that the whole monument has leaned over towards the north. Stone A has gone right away from its original perpendicular position, crushing the dry stone walling beneath it. Stone B, which in its turn has fractured in the middle and leaned northward, becoming practically useless as a support, and stone C is the only one which appears to have kept its original position. Under the circumstances, it is remarkable that the capstone has not fallen, since it has been carried at least 2 feet out of its original position, and only received support from 2 stones of any value, one of which is also out of position. The danger of collapse has now been removed by the insertion of 2 built-up stone pillars by the Office of Works. With regard to the cairn, which must have once covered the 2 burial chambers on this site, a trench which was driven out from the base of the chamber, along a line passing between stones B and C, showed conclusively that the whole had been cleared away, and that ploughing had taken place to within a few feet of the monument in recent times. Within the memory of old men still living in the district, a chamber stood in a small enclosure about 100 feet in diameter, surrounded by a hedge bank. All trace of this has disappeared, and some of the large stones now visible in the straight modern field banks close by may have come from the destroyed chamber. The round cairn, generally thought to have once covered Ty Newydd, is now marked out by these small bollards. The monument itself is believed to be Neolithic, but the finds inside are from the Bronze Age, suggesting a long use of this site, or perhaps reuse. It is believed that the monument was originally covered with a large earth mound, which was later removed. Although it's still much debated about which cromlechs had covering mounds, some evidently did, with many of the stones removed and reused over the years. Others, such as Pentre Ifan, are considered by some experts to have been freestanding monuments with no covering mound. On our travels around Wales, we've noticed that brick supports are surprisingly common at a lot of these sites, such as Tinkinswood, whose pillar was added in 1914 after excavations revealed a massive crack in the huge capstone. Dyfryn ar Dudwy, where one of the cromlechs has a similar pillar, added after excavations in 1960. Trevignach is another site in Anglesey, whose eastern chamber was partially reconstructed in 1980. And then of course you have the likes of Bryn Celli Ddu, which are massive reconstructions which feature concrete lintels, concrete pillars, and then of course Barclodiad y Gawres, which is an entire concrete dome covering the entire site. As you might be able to tell, we're quite interested in the reconstruction processes at a lot of these sites. Not necessarily simply because of what was found or what they think the site looked like, but how that opinion has changed, what we would potentially do differently now, and the steps that they went through to preserve the sites for later generations. We've recently been in touch with Cadw, specifically about Barclodiad y Gawres, but also asking broader questions about the challenges that they face when they're restoring these sites and trying to preserve them for future generations. Because, of course, it's more complicated than just put the stones back where they were, because we don't always know exactly where they were. So do you rely on the guesswork of the time to try and get them back to their original positions? Or do you just try and maintain the stones where they've fallen to? So if a stone has fallen to 45 degrees, we can't necessarily assume that it was perfectly upright before. So do we just keep it at the 45 degrees and don't let it get any worse? Then of course you've got sites where the opinions have changed, where they don't necessarily think that there was a covering mound now. What if back then they had gone to huge efforts to recreate this covering mound, bringing in lots of foreign stone and soil that are just really vandalising an archaeological site? But whether or not you think those things are vandalism, necessary protection, or if even it's a really, really good restoration in your opinion, it's still a massive challenge faced by Cadw and other government bodies that are protecting our historic sites around the country. Recently, heritage crime has been back in the news. Of course, there have been motorbikers driving over old monuments, burial mounds, things that they potentially just see as a lump in the ground. And that's why it's so important that Cadw does get the funding to put signage in place, because although there has been a change in the law with heritage crime where you can't just claim ignorance now, it would be better if the crime just didn't get committed in the first place. And a lot of the time, that's mostly due to people being unaware, rather than being outright negligent or wantonly destructive. And so one of the things that we'd love to do is try and raise awareness of these sites. And obviously there is that challenge of, by putting these sites on social media and drawing more attention to them, you are going to get more footfall to the sites. You are going to get more people going there. So there is a certain responsibility to anyone that is promoting these sites to try and also make people aware that they do have to be protected. They are very vulnerable. But surely one of the most basic things we could have would be some sort of signage, some sort of information that is telling people that sometimes quite a subtle and, you know, not particularly impressive part of the environment is actually an unexcavated 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 year old site that one day, with the right technology and the right money, the right funding, you know, maybe Mike Parker Pearson can start spreading his net a bit wider and not just looking for the blue stones, but, you know, maybe someone like that with a big name who can get permission to excavate at these sites one day will. And if they haven't been destroyed by motorbikers, walkers, people building stone towers and just being general, then maybe we'll actually have a better understanding of what was going on thousands of years ago. Maybe the information is still out there, we just haven't found it yet. So let's not forget up. Just wandering around that one, trying to think how my mind's going to remember it, because it's like,
it looks different from every angle.
Yeah,